So, before we started Dearborn Girl, I, like many people in the community, had a negative perception of what it meant to be a Dearborn Girl. And when I had to come to defense of the community, I would always think about the women that inspired me. And today, I'm lucky enough to be able to interview one of my biggest inspirations in the community. Hi, Hajji Najah.
Hi, Yasmin, thank you.
Thank you for being here. So, our theme this season is Never Sleep on a Dearborn Girl, because we see that the women in this community are just amazing. So when I say that line, what does that mean to you?
Well, I've grown up with a group of matriarchs, so I think that I do understand almost innately the power of women, and I value that. It's not that I don't value what men bring to the table. I do, but I kind of relish in the multiplicity maybe of what women can do and the way that they're able to manage so much. And it's actually a cerebral thing too, so after you study it and you do the MRI images and all of this, I'm fascinated by neuroscience, by the way. So I'm fascinated by the way the female brain works in its capacity. So I would say, so I'm inspired by all of you, right? So it's mutual inspiration, because what I do see is I'm thankful that you feel a sense of inspiration, because that means that somehow there's a legacy there that maybe, I'm leaving behind, and that's important to me. But I also followed in the footsteps of very, very powerful women. The one story that comes to my mind is actually Mrs. Amen. And she stood before a bulldozer in the south end of Dearborn, her and another woman named Helen Atwell. And that's when they were going to plow the houses down in the south end of Dearborn. And these women literally stood in front of the bulldozer and said no.
Wow.
And so I've always been exposed to the strength of women. My grandmother was a matriarch in our community, one of the first matriarchs in our community. My mother, very, very powerful in her own right. I think she's one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met. And then my youth mentors. Zahia Khalil was a youth mentor to me, and I think the reason why I mentored the youth and had a youth group was because I had one under her leadership. So I think we're a very amazing mix, and the way that I like to explain it is we're not a census box. You can't tease out who we are and put us in a check box. We're a blended identity. We're an Arab American Muslim identity, Arab Christian identity. You can't tease us out and isolate us. That's what I think is most powerful.
I think you just described what it means to be a Dearborn Girl in the most beautiful, eloquent way. And I love it. I love it. So, Hajji Najah, you're the founder and CEO of Zaman International, which is a nonprofit that helps single women and children pull themselves out of poverty. And this has become a staple of empowerment in the community. So tell me, how did you start Zaman, and why did you start Zaman?
So I think Zaman found me. I didn't found it. But it's a sad story, and it's a story a lot of people don't know. But I was working in the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, at Oakwood Hospital back in 1996. And that's when the refugee crisis was kind of at an all-time high, with many people coming from the Gulf War. But those people who are coming from the Gulf War, and one of the things that really saddens my heart, and I know it would sadden yours too because of your sense of social justice, is when people are displaced, rather than like chain immigration, but when they are actually displaced from their countries of origin because of war and suffering, and then they come to another host country, that negotiating and repatterning and all that they have to do, while much of it is positive, much of it is also painful. So that's the painful part of Zaman, is a NICU baby, a baby that was born to a refugee family, 2 twins. The first one died. The second one lasted about 3 months. But in that time, that baby was very, very, very sick. So the hospital decided, based on the doctor's opinion, that this was a case of futility, which means the baby must be removed from the ventilator. Having been then involved in that case, the family didn't want to remove the ventilator. They had already suffered tremendous loss in their home country, and it was painful watching them. I had also lost to children early on in my life before I had Gandia. So I think that part of me was connecting with them as well. But I thought people have the right to die the way they wish to die. That's part of my end of life training. And so I went to bat for them. And I managed to negotiate with the hospital, take the baby home. Kind of unheard of. The physician actually resigned, and the case went home, and I went to visit this baby based on the hospital's recommendation. And I walked into, for the first time, poverty that I did not even know. This is what's interesting. I walk into a home that has an oriental, how-to-be looking carpet, right? And there's nothing there. So my assumption is they're moving in, right?
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to understand this family's not moving in. This is their existence. And there was nothing there. Nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. The children, the parents, the grandparents were still there. And so when I asked to see the baby, this is the part that just always chokes me up, even 20 years later. The baby was in a laundry basket with white towels, like 6 white towels, 7 white towels, and the baby was just lying on the set of towels. And, at first, judgment. And then second, like within seconds, dignity. And I did this paradigm shift, like this is all this family has, and they're giving it to this baby. And so that was really rough for me to see, and I wasn't even understanding what was going on because I was trying to process it. But they had so much dignity in their eyes and so much hope. And so, again, I'm choking up talking about it.
Yeah.
I left the front porch, did what I'm doing now, cried, called my mom. I'm like, Mom, this is what's going on. And she was moving, so she's like, because that was my mom and dad's relationship. He loved her so much, whatever she wanted, new furniture every 5 years, even though it had plastic on it, and we never, ever, sat on it, unless it was a wedding or a funeral. And carpet lines in the living room. I always talk about this because it reminds me of the big fat Greek wedding. So she turned over all her things to me. So my children and I, we got a U-Haul, and we went and we furnished the whole house.
Wow.
The baby died about within that week, I don't know exactly, and then we buried the baby. So that story started Zaman because it was my first glimpse at poverty. But I didn't know we grew up poor in the South End. That's what was fascinating.
So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I know you're all Dearborn girls, but we're the South End girls.
What does that mean?
And once a South Ender, always a South Ender. I don't know if you all have that same feeling if you grew up in the East End or the West End. I've always wanted to ask that question. There is such a sense of pride, and I can't even quite describe it. It was diverse, which I feel like in many ways Dearborn has lost the diversity that we grew up with. We grew up with a hub of immigrants, Italians and Polish and German and Macedonian. And you could walk down your street and it was like the United Nations. And so we all had this immigrant experience of growing up with children of immigrants, first generation. I wasn't first generation, but you knew everyone right in your neighborhood. If someone got married and they came out on the front porch, like the whole entire, it was like a village. We would all go and watch. And if someone died, we're all there. Much like it is now, but much more intimate. And then your children could just run from house to house to house, and you knew everyone, and everyone loved everyone. And so you grew up with a sense of identity, a sense of love, and it was a hub because it was the poorest part of Dearborn and the most marginalized part of Dearborn. But we didn't know that until we grew up and went to high school. And then we realized, moving from the South End to going to school in the East End and going to Fordson, like, wow. And then you're getting this East End influence, and then, the whole Fordson Dearborn High thing, and, that cross Ann Arbor Trail and University Village, like all these things were really big deals for the South End kids. So it's a sense of pride, and I still go there a lot.
It's funny when you hear people talk about the South End, especially from your time, it is a deep sense of pride that you don't see now. So you've watched Dearborn evolve through the years, and what's one of the biggest things that you've realized that our community has done, both good and bad?
On the good side, we're resilient. On the not as positive side, we haven't allowed young people to take leadership roles. And that's something I want to spend my life changing. With the start of the YMA 20 years ago, very strategically planted leadership skills in a whole host of young people who I see it happening now, like teaching people point of entrance, point of exit. How do you think? What do you do? What is a master plan? How do you execute? And so, earlier before the show, we were talking about our strengths and the strength finders. Like, everyone ought to be taking one of those. But what bothered me a lot is I felt in many ways, because I wasn't an immigrant, that I wasn't Arab enough.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't Lebanese enough. I didn't understand enough. Therefore, I had to carve out a leadership position, and it wasn't recognized. It's something I had to fight for. I had to fight for that space, and even still really didn't get it in many ways. Whereas my philosophy is, listen, next generation, make room for them. Mm-hmm. You are our legacy, and I believe in that. So if I invest energy in any of you, that's return energy in me. And we just become better when you make space for young people to grow and to push them up, elevate them. And what are we afraid of unless we're afraid of our own positions?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just don't run like that. I don't believe in that. I believe in extensive leadership. So that was the difficult thing, I think. But I always say Dearborn's special. It just is. And I know we get a lot of grief, but I really appreciate it when people come globally and then they come to Dearborn and they're like, wow. And that's always a reminder to me that it is a wow.
What perceptions have you heard of Dearborn that you've been either very proud of or not proud of at all? And what would you change about the ones that you're not proud of?
That's a good question. I don't usually lead with things that I'm not proud of, because I usually focus on things that I am proud of. So that's a kind of hard question for me to answer. I think it's easy to pick on things, but if you're going to pick on them, fix it.
Yeah.
And if you can't fix it, then be quiet about it. And Prophet Muhammad, as you know, I'm deeply spiritual, and I would say people see me as like this religious kind of person, but for me it's about the spirituality of the universe, and everything in my heart is connected, everything. So, the idea that the Prophet has taught us, if you see an injustice, you should fix it with your hands. And if you can't fix it with your hands, you should speak out against it with your tongue. And if you can't speak out against it with your tongue, you should condemn it in your heart. And the third is the weakest of faith. So that's a call to action. So I'd say people, okay, you want to complain? You want to sit around in your living rooms and talk about other people? Do something about it. Do something positive. Because chatting about the ills of a community, what community doesn't have them?
Absolutely.
What church didn't have a fallout? Which board of directors didn't have a fallout? Which community hasn't had political strife? So that's part of living. But I think our resilience as a community, if someone were to come and attack Dearborn, whatever way, let's say verbally or whatever, like we've had in the past, with bigots or racists, you notice we all pull together.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? That's a sense of family. It's a sense of pride.
Absolutely. And it's amazing because when we think about the people that are the most active to in answering that call to action, we think about the youth. And I think that the next generation, Generation Z and millennials, will be the ones to change all of the things that we want to change. And I think my question for you regarding the youth is, if you could talk to your younger self, what would you tell her and what advice would you give her?
keep fighting, make space. You have self-worth, even though, you know, our culture teaches that you don't get self-worth till you're older, and you don't get respect until you're older. I don't believe in that. I respect you. When I say I respect you, Yasmin, I really respect you. Like, I respect Rima, I respect Malak, I respect what you are all doing here, but I respect it from the bottom of my heart. It's not an artificial thing. Because, like, you know, God created you. He gave you these talents. When you respect people, you're respecting yourself, and you're respecting your creator, and you're acknowledging that this creator has put this human being together. So when I look at you, I'm just not looking at you. I'm looking through you. I'm amazed by the human garden. I am. That's just who I am. So that's what I would say to myself. I wanted to go to med school.
Okay.
I have very clinical medical brain. I get 3 to 4 phone calls a day about everyone's medical issues, and I'm not a doctor. And my mom wouldn't allow me to go to med school because it was Wayne State, and it was back in the 70s, and you know, back then Detroit had this horrible rap and all of this stuff. So I had to settle on nursing in my mind, and maybe that was a blessing, but then there was flack for that. None of the girls were going to college in my generation, Yasmin. They were getting married at 15 and 16, and most did not finish high school. So I was like 23. I was considered an old maid, not married, 22 maybe. And then the idea that I wanted to be a nurse, which was considered disrespectful, because, you know, in the Arab world, a nurse would be taking care of the behinds of people. Mm. Like, I had to deal and negotiate with all of that. And I was one of 3 nurses in our community, and I'm thankful that I did do it, because it opened this door now to women and men who are in the field doing amazing things. So it's those kind of challenges. If I were to talk to my early self again, I would say just keep pushing forward and head down, heart open, go forward. That's what I still say that to myself.
You're a trailblazer by all means, and you've taken a very unconventional route, but when people deal with stereotypes, then they deal with cultural norms that they want to break. What would you tell them? Because you, with your path and your story, you kind of broke down all of these different glass ceilings and even cultural barriers, and here you are doing such amazing things.
You know, I read this poem. I was like in college, and I don't even know who wrote it. It says, I am I. Do not change me, condemn me, nor put me down. I am I. And it just like hit me. And I'm like, yeah, that's who I want to be. I want to be I want to be me. It's okay. That's the way God made me. God knows what he's doing. God created you. He knows what he's doing. So why all these judgments on people? I don't like judging people. I really don't like that. And I think that if there is a negative, we do that. I think it's part of our culture. But I'm also trained as a transcultural nurse. I don't know if you know that. My background is in cross-cultural work. So for me, the way that I've understood this over 40 years now is that everyone is a culture unto themselves. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter where you're from. You are a culture unto yourself. I love that. I love knowing that person. I love seeing how, you know, they flourish, how they grow. I'm a generation, you're another generation, but what do we share in common? You know, all of that. I don't know, I'm fascinated by it all. There's an anthropologist in me.
It sounds like it. So you have the most positive spirit, and you deal with seeing pain and suffering on a daily basis, but how do you remain so positive all the time?
Well, it's a strength, I guess. God gave me that positive attitude, so I'm thankful to him for that. I believe in the tenderness of our frailty. I don't know how else to say that. Like, I am going to die. I know that I'm going to die. It's not something that I can stop or change. So if I can have compassion for someone else who's dying, I've just kind of dropped that compassion in the universe. And so life, there's a cycle, right? Like, you can't understand joy if you don't understand pain. You just can't. And I always tell people, you know, especially young people, you might be at the top of the mountain, but when you're at the top of the mountain, don't make the mistake of looking up. Look down. Because you're going to go to the valley again. That's just the way life is. And when you're in the valley, you're going to learn something. And then you're going to go back up to that mountain with it again. When you're in the valley, look up. And when you're on the mountain, look down. And that's what I've learned about life. Like, I've learned, and a lot of the people who've died in my arms have taught me this. I mean, I've been with hundreds of people. They say the most amazing things in and around their end of life. And so I feel like I've kind of been watered, and they've given me these golden nuggets and gifts. And what I've learned for them is to shut out the noise, that what matters in the end is who you are, how you've lived, your integrity, your dignity, your family. So Zaman is a result of this baby. Wow. And they said he had no, it was a futility. Well, that baby has left the biggest legacy. We've helped millions of people in over 25 countries, and I mean thousands upon thousands of people because of one baby.
Wow, the impact that life just made on the entire community, the entire world is just, it's amazing.
Right, and that was a life that we saw as useless.
Wow.
In many ways. Like, what do you do with that?
You have to change your perspective.
You do, right? So I see everything as a positive. I really do.
That's so beautiful.
So, because I want to say something to the young people. You don't have a problem until there's no solution. So if someone has a terminal illness, there's absolutely no solution, okay? You might say that's a problem. But really, problems are the way we perceive them. So get to the solution. Get to the solution.
So where do you see this work taking the community?
Well, it's been 20 years now, right? So 6,000 volunteers, a lot of leadership training. I hope, let's put the poverty issue to the side for a moment and the impact that we've had on poverty. Let's talk about the impact just on the community itself. I think Zaman brings to the table this kind of little space in the world where, in our community specifically, where everyone is there. Doesn't matter what faith you are. Doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what nationality you are. It doesn't matter what orientation you have. Zaman is a place that's open for all of humanity, and that's why it's called our Hope for Humanity Center, right? I learned from the people who are dying that you cannot define someone's hope. Hope is intrinsic. It's like built into us, and it's a God-given trait. And if you take away hope, or you try to define it, you've actually crushed a situation. And many of our young people who are turning to drugs or to other kinds of things, it's because that sense of hope has been tampered with.
Wow.
Somehow the transmission of their self-worth has not been coded right. And this is a sidebar, but this is why I say teachers are like one of the most magnificent gifts to children, because your teachers really, especially early on, can shape your identity and help you have a sense of self-worth. I bet you everyone that comes on this show has a teacher story.
For sure.
There's no doubt. So I see that Zaman has made it okay to work across culture, across religions, across identities, across race. I will be happy going to my grave knowing that that happens someplace in our community.
Wow.
And it's not just, and to me it's the highest form of Islam, is to be open to the world. From a poverty perspective, the fact that we are working now on workforce development, really to the point now where we are seeing that we are breaking the cycle of poverty, that we have this one-stop place where people can come and have a life change, and be supported, and a no judgment zone. I think that is going to have an intergenerational effect. Many of our clients have students now who are going to med school, and they've been supported for 10, 20 years through Zaman. So that idea that like you're actually breaking the cycle of poverty locally within your own community, but still maintaining the dignity of people and not putting it out there is important. One thing that bothers me a lot is all of the like, oh, I went and I fed somebody picture. Mm-hmm. Like, are you serious? Yeah. That's so painful. That means that we're taking advantage of someone's pain by making ourselves feel good that we did a good deed. Mm-hmm. No. You diminish yourself when you do that, Just take care of people because it's the right thing to do, and the right things will happen. I've never looked for recognition. It comes, but I'm not looking for it. I've got a lot of crystal, a lot of awards, a lot of global things. None of that means anything to me because I can't take it with me.
You're absolutely
I'm not
right.
going to pack it in my keppen and say, oh, extra 80 pounds of crystal. Not going to do that.
Yeah, your humility is astounding, and I think it's something that people are very even inspired by too, because your accolades are things that you don't value over people, which is something that people need to learn and kind of grow from. So I want to talk about identity a little bit.
Okay.
So when we're asked a lot this question, being Arab American and being Muslims and being from Dearborn, what does it mean to be American? But I'm going to change the question up, and I'm going to ask you, what does it mean to be a Muslim Arab American living in this country?
So I used to say, post 9/11, when I was like teaching across the country about Islam, I used to say, I grew up with kind of this ice cream sundae, right? Being American was the most important thing to my family. Like, we did everything. Halloween, Christmas, Easter egg hunts, Thanksgiving. We did it all. My father was an army man. We always had an American flag someplace, and he even wanted it on his grave. It's still on his grave. He always said he loved the patriotism of this country, and he served this country. So we grew up with this very strong American identity. And then I think the second scoop on the Sunday would have been our Arab identity, close second, which is all of the beautiful cultural things, right? The family, learning to cook, what it means to be a sitbit, learning how to wash dishes at 5 years old and do it the right way, learning how to cook, all of these things, and the role of a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, and the balance of all of that, and a niece, right, and a cousin. These are all important roles for us. And then there was Islam. And Islam was a cherry on top. And so I had to do the reverse of what many of you grew up with. Many of you grew up knowing your Islam. Many of you went to Muslim schools. Many of you, especially now, have access to everything that you need to learn. We didn't have that. So I had to go on this spiritual journey to figure out who I wanted to be. I mean, how do I know that my Roman Catholic friend going to catechism when we were 7 and 8 years old, and the altar boys, how did I know that they weren't right and we were wrong? I thought a lot about that as a child. So it wasn't enough for me that I was born a Muslim. I really wanted to know why I was a Muslim. And every time I'd ask the questions, I get the typical answers. Don't ask. Like, why do you ask? Almost as though I was threatening my family's identity by asking. So I went on my own spiritual journey, took world religion classes, and I fell in love with Islam because it included everybody else. You have connectedness, I have connectedness. Yeah. It's no wonder why I would love Islam. because it was inclusive. And I loved that I could have everyone. So raising my children, I tried to reverse the Sunday. Islam first, because it's the broadest and the most, I think, expansive identity. And then the American and Arab identity were kind of like mixed, half and half, you know, and then there was no cherry on top. And so I think my children have grown up quite differently than I have.
When your identity is called into question by the rest of the country, not necessarily in Dearborn, how do you respond? Because you take all of the values of what it means to be a Muslim, and that's literally what you wear on your sleeve, and that's who you are. And so they're not only attacking your identity, but they're attacking you personally. And for people that are listening, and for people that have to deal with all of the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim rhetoric, what would you say to them, and how do you deal with this? Because you are in the public, and you do have a big platform.
I think that you can break down barriers with the way you present in the world. So I have to check myself first, because maybe deep down inside me I have those biases about them. Maybe we do, and maybe we think that we're the ones being attacked, but maybe deep down inside of ourselves, we're racist ourselves. We saw that growing up in Dearborn. Dearborn was very racist growing up. In my generation, I used to call it, as I grew up, the South of the North. And so, I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I grew up when there was the race riots. I grew up seeing the National Guard come to the South End, the city of Detroit burning. Like, that was 1967. I was a child, but I remember all of that. So I first checked myself. And I'll tell you a cute story about being in Glamour magazine and how I really checked myself. But I think when my identity's attacked, my instinct is naturally to say that person lacks a lot. And that's why they're attacking. Because we attack when we're thinking with our lower brainstem, and that's kind of what's happening in the country now, I think. It's survival of the fittest. I'm better than you. And we even have those dynamics in our own community, right? So let's face it, let's call it out, right?
Absolutely.
A person from this country is better than the person from this country. I don't roll like that. And so I'm always looking for how to make a friend or how to just be myself. And as you know, post 9/11, I had a huge platform across the country, and I was in so many churches and synagogues and everywhere. And it was always that making people see their own bias. Like, see my smile before you see my scarf. What's in my head, not what's on my head, right? When you talk like that, people start to see themselves, and they start to see like how little they are. My thing is like, let me give them a chance to grow. That's just how I see it. I don't often like it. Sometimes it's painful, being spit at, being looked at the wrong way. I smile a lot because I think that's important. I try to be gentle as I walk the earth. I think that's important. And I don't lead with arrogance, and because I see them as being arrogant. But oftentimes it's just not knowing. And I know Nadia, my daughter's had this experience. I've had it. Hajji Najah's had it. And the interfaith work that we do, which we have a wonderful interfaith mosaic in Detroit, people end up crying when we're speaking. They're just bawling in the audience. And they feel so moved when we speak about the universality of Islam, about what it means to be an Arab girl, and, you know, telling the stories. And everyone can relate to those stories. Sometimes I think we're our own worst enemy, Yasmin, because we don't get out and we don't tell those stories. Or when we tell them, we think that they're exclusively ours. They're not.
No, your story is your story, and my story is my story.
And you should want to hear other people's stories and learn from them. You can learn a lot from other people. They don't have to be Arab and Muslim for me to learn.
Absolutely. That's your connectiveness coming out, too.
Right.
So my last question for you is, why are you proud to be a Dearborn girl?
Because I'm a Dearborn girl.
Because you're a Dearborn girl. I love it.
Because I feel like I was raised with the best of values, and I had the best teachers at Salina School, life-changing teachers who loved us and took care of us. And because I think there's a certain pride that goes along with being a Dearborn girl. We have to protect that, by the way, right? I almost feel like there's a fight to protect that heritage, that beauty, that whatever you want to call it, that I can't describe, that is what makes a Dearborn girl a Dearborn girl. But I also want to see the Dearborn girls adopt that same sense of pride, that they walk with a humility, not with an arrogance, not because we're women, just because we do have a gift. We have something special in our community, and to really relish in it and take advantage of it and to make it better, and to reach out to other younger women and to mentor them and to take them in under your wing and continue this legacy.
The legacy is something I'm so proud of, and I'm so inspired by you, and I know the rest of the community is. So thank you for everything that you do.
No,
thank you for being on the show.
I wish I could do more, to be honest with you, but you got to balance life.